This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm the host, Kevin Randle. I'll be joined in just a moment with William Puckett, who runs a website that's filled with all kinds of fascinating up-to-the-minute sightings. But before we start, I wanted to talk for a moment about something that plagues me periodically. I've been working on a book called Understanding Roswell. It was suggested to me by a publisher, and anytime a publisher comes to you and wants to buy a book, it's always, what do you need type thing. But as I was going through the material on Jesse Marcel Sr., I ran into a bit of a problem, and it's something that I'm not sure a lot of people worry about. But I always thought of Jesse Marcel Jr., of course, as a friend and a fellow soldier. We both served in Iraq at different times. And reading the material from his father in various sources, including Linda Corley's book, For the Sake of My Country, some of the interviews that he had conducted, some of the things that he had said, it seemed to me that he engaged in a bit of willful embellishment of his resume. I'm not sure I really want to call it lying, although in essence, I guess you could say that's what it was. But it bothered me because of the high esteem the family held him in. And one of the examples, I think maybe the best example, is he made a big deal about having performed an appendectomy on a soldier while they were serving in the Pacific during the Second World War. And he was guided by a surgeon over the radio, one of those kind of things. The surgeon wasn't there and the guy needed the operation like right this minute, and Jesse Marcel supposedly performed it. When Linda Corley was interviewing him, and the tapes are available, and in her book, you can read the transcripts as well, you get to the point where he starts to tell this story, and his wife, Vo, says, "Oh, not that story again." And you make it just causes you to wonder for a moment, was he making it up? Does she know that he was making it up? It's just one of the war stories that people tend to tell type of thing. But it grows on beyond that when the family said that he had received a soldier's medal. And a soldier's medal is given not necessarily for valor, but of course, valor can play into it. Not necessarily for saving a life, but saving a life can play into it. It's a fairly high decoration in the military and suggests some kind of outstanding performance. I have a complete copy of his 201 file. This is before the internet went nuts and everybody started stealing identities, and the information became protected by the Privacy Act, and probably rightly so, I might add. But I've got a complete copy of the 201 file. I've got his officer ratings. I've got letters back and forth with various people. And the problem is there's no mention of a soldier's medal anywhere in there. His Bronze Star is mentioned in there. His air medals are mentioned in there. I even found out one of the ribbons I couldn't identify in the black and white picture of him that I have was the Philippine Liberation Medal. I didn't know they gave one for that, but that's apparently that was his sixth award, and I couldn't identify it. I could identify the Bronze Star and the Air Medal and the other awards that he had, but I couldn't identify that one. So you have to wonder about that, because it's an important part of the whole picture. I mean, is his testimony reliable? And I'm thinking that if we had only Jesse Marcel's testimony about the events in Roswell in 1947, we could pretty well eliminate him at this point. Fortunately, I and many others have talked to other members of Colonel Blanchard's staff, Marcel being on Blanchard's primary staff as the intelligence officer, but we talked to Edwin Easley, we talked to Thomas Dubose, who was the chief of staff, which was a very, very important position. We talked to Joe Briley, who was the operations officer, for example. So we have other people involved in this telling us other aspects of the story. So we have corroboration for what Marcel said. The problem I run into is how much of that information do I release? Is it necessary to do that? I mean, the family will be upset. Family's going to be upset now, I suppose. I would have never said anything about this if Jesse Jr. was still alive because of the high esteem he held his father. I've run into this in other places where I have pointed out the information. Robert Willingham comes to mind immediately, who talked about the Del Rio crash, and it was clear that he was not the Air Force colonel he claimed to be, and a lot of the things he said were not true. Jesse Marcel is a slightly different fish, if you want to go that direction, because he did serve in the positions he talked about. He did hold the rank that he talked about. It was just some of the things he sort of embellished. So I kind of throw that out there. And I'm always kind of conflicted in some of these cases about releasing all the information, although it does have an impact on the viability of the story and the truthfulness of the individual telling that. Clearly, he was involved in the retrieval operation, meaning even if you want to go from a skeptical point of view of picking up the weather balloon and taking it to Fort Worth, or he picked up pieces of a flying saucer and took them to Fort Worth. I mean, that part of the story is true, and we have documentation from the newspapers and everything else that prove that sort of thing. So that's kind of a dilemma I find myself in. Maybe it's my old age getting to me, of being a little bit more respectful of others and their secrets. I just thought I would mention that, and I didn't mean to drag it out this long, because I know William Puckett's there, and he's got a lot of good information for us. And I'll just note here that he was employed as a meteorologist with the National Weather Service for 3 years and the Environmental Protection Agency for 27 years. He retired from government service in 2007. He is a professional member of the American Meteorological Society. He has worked as a consultant for UFO Hunters, a series on the History Channel. I'm not sure I would mention that. I've been on some things on the History Channel I wouldn't mention, but I digress and make a bit of a humor there. He has appeared on 2 UFO Hunters episodes. He appeared in an episode of Science Channel's Close Encounter series, there you go, and was also a research associate for NARCAP, which is the National Reporting Center for Anomalous Phenomena. That's almost as a crummy acronym as the government came up with after the UAP thing. He is credited with meteorologic and radio analysis for the November 7th, 2006 UFO incident at O'Hare Airport. He is formerly the state director for the Mutual UFO Network in Montana. By the way, I've been to Montana, just so you know. It's irrelevant to anything, but I just thought I'd mention that. He is formerly state director of Montana. He is certified field investigator for MUFON and has written several technical articles for the MUFON Journal. He has been guest on many talk shows, including this one in the past, and interviewed on some TV programs. He continues with his work as an independent investigator and presents his results of his studies on his website, UFOs Northwest and UFO Sightings Montana. Welcome to A Different Perspective, and I'm sorry I delayed it with my rant there.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks a lot for having me. I'd like to say just a few words about the Marcels. I did have the opportunity to meet Jesse Marcel Jr. Right after I moved to Montana in 2011, and we had lunch and talked about Roswell. At the particular time, I was doing some research on the Roswell incident for the History Channel, for the UFO Hunters series. And I actually showed Jesse some of the data that I'd found, namely that the weather observer, so to speak, was gone on the day that they flew the wreckage from Roswell Army Airfield to Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. I find that to be quite interesting. The only facility in the world that had nuclear weapons right in the peak of the thunderstorm season, which is aviation hazard, and the weather observer seems to be gone. I did find that interesting. Anyhow, I did really have a nice visit with Jesse Jr., and I interviewed him on a radio program I was hosting at a particular time about his book, and I'd read his book. So I can't speak for the efficacy of Jesse Marcel Sr. Obviously, you're pretty well rehearsed in that. Although I will say that some UFO witnesses, even with, so to speak, expert credentials, sometimes break down a bit when you start doing a little bit of research in their backgrounds. I have found that to be true. From a personal perspective, talking about my website, I pretty much quit investigating old cases because people don't know the dates, times, and details. I only bring that up because you're talking about validity of witnesses, and old cases are very much dependent on the validity of witnesses. And being a scientist, I like to get my hands on data, on forensic data, namely photos, videos, and sometimes trace evidence. So on that basis, I've given lower priority to older cases. So the cases you'll see on my website, particularly the recent cases posted, will be cases that within the past year or two. So I just thought I would mention that.
Let me say one thing here. We need to distinguish between Jesse Marcel Sr. and Jesse Marcel Jr. And I've met Jesse Marcel Jr. many, many times. We've had many, many conversations, and I find him to be an impeccable source. I found nothing that he would suggest he embellished anything or was less than candid about what was going on. I think he was a very respectful individual. I think a very honorable individual. I think is a better way of saying that. I distinguish between him and his father. I know that there was a great bond between the two of them, and that was why I'd be hesitant to say anything if Jesse Jr. was still alive, simply because of the bond between the father and the son. But moving beyond that, I was going to ask you later on in the program, and we have just a few moments here, in looking at your website, I notice that periodically you make comments. Do you do much of the way of investigating when the reports come in? I know you have lots of reports coming into to your website. Do you do much investigation or analysis?
I do as much as I can, but for the most part, cases that I get, I don't go out and investigate them. I mean, I get cases all over the world. I collect maps and try to get photos and videos. And what I actually find quite useful using the WordPress protocol, the blog format, is that I rely somewhat on comments from people. And I do get some pretty good comments. And any cases that have photos or videos, I put on my homepage so they have more visibility. And so I'm more likely to get comments. But wherever possible, I'll ask for radar data, and once in a great while, I'll ask them to collect evidence for me, and then I'll send that evidence in. That has not happened in the past few years, but I have a material specialist and also an organic chemist, Phyllis Bunninger, that is at no cost, has done some work for me. She's a MUFON member. So in answer to your question, I don't do a lot of investigation, but I don't just take everything for granted either. I will look at astronomical data, satellite data, meteorological data. So, that's kind of the scope of my investigation. But for the most part, sometimes I just put the case out there and then and rely on comments using my blog format.
Well, we'll get back to this in a minute here. Especially, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Starlink satellites, I think, which are responsible for a great number of sightings at least in the last few months or the last couple of years. We'll get back to that in a minute. We're going to have to take a break. I wanted to mention my blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. You mentioned a homepage or something. Is that a website that we can all visit? You want to get an address there?
Absolutely. It's www.ufosnw.com. And my other blog, which you mentioned at the head of the show, for Montana UFO sightings, is www.ufo-sightings, plural, montana.com.
Well, for those of you who want to remember it easily, if you take a look at the one website, it's ufosnorthwest.com. So you can put it all together that way, but it's, as you said, UFOs SNW. We will be back right after this with William Puckett. We're talking about UFOs, of course, and what's going on in the world of UFO today, and maybe talk a little bit about the new government investigation. So we'll be back in just a moment, so please stick around. And welcome back. I'm here with William Puckett. As you can see, we're not in the same room. We are practicing social distancing as demanded by the government. We're not breathing the same air. We're isolating, I guess is the way to say it. When we went away, we were talking about some of the information that comes to his websites. And I noticed in reviewing some of that data that an awful lot of it is kind of solved by what I think is called a Starlink satellite. Can you give me a little bit of update on that?
Well, there have been several launches. I believe, and I might be wrong, I think the first launch was around May of 2019, and there's been several launches since then. And my understanding is that they're satellites that are designed to beam in high-speed internet for remote locations. And he continues to launch them. For a while, they were generating just a huge volume of reports for me, so many that I just quit posting them because there was no time. I did get a video of one, I don't know, a couple months ago. I did post it just for information, for the public, so that when they see them, they don't run to report them to me. Fortunately, I believe recently, or maybe a few months ago, Elon Musk toned down the brightness of these things. So they're not interfering with astronomers as much, and they're not generating as many UFO reports. And I'm not getting as many Starlink reports anymore. And I attribute some of that to the public education, maybe to the dimming of it, of them. So a combination of those. But yeah, they're definitely a problem as far as UFO investigating of causing a high volume of reports. And they're also a problem for astronomers, from what I understand. So, but I believe, and a matter of fact, I just read this morning, I believe he's going to launch some more pretty soon. So there'll be more up there. So, but yeah, they definitely been a problem for UFO investigators like myself of how to handle
the photographs you had on the on your blog or your website look like a streak of light. Are they just a single object, and the streak of light is a reflection of the exposure of the image there, or are there a number of them that are satellites that are kind of linked together? They travel in a pack.
Well, they're always very close together. The typical report that I get with Starlink satellites, 20 to 50 objects moving in a line to the northeast. If I could, paraphrase a typical Starlink report, that would be what it would be. And they move in a line, and some people will say they're moving fairly rapidly. And this I attribute to autokinesis. People who say, oh, they jump in and out of formation. That's an optical illusion. And then the actual line that you might see, actual congruent line, would be more to probably a lens flare type effect. But they're typically, physically, I don't know how close they are together, but they're, when you look at them, and some people will see up to 100 too, moving in a line. But that's typically, to paraphrase, the type of Starlink report that I get.
As you can see, I've spent some time looking at your website and noticing that a lot of the solutions were Starlink satellites. You get a photograph. I notice you get a lot of photographs in to the website. Is there an analysis that you perform on those? I notice sometimes you explain, well, this looks like it might be this, that, or another thing, but some of them have no explanations. What exactly do you do when you get a photograph?
Well, the first thing I do when I get a photograph, and most photographs anymore come from cell phones, but some come from regular cameras. I look at what we call the metadata of the photograph. That gives me a little authenticity. Has it been photoshopped? Because if it's photoshopped, it'll show up as in the digital signature in the metadata. But I look at the metadata first, and then I look at the weather conditions, and I may ask the witness questions. One thing that criticism that I have a lot of, so to speak, expert photo analysts, they ignore what the witness sees and what the witness says. I think what the witness sees and says is also important with respect to photo analysis. I mean, what if you're looking at, was it a reflection? What did they actually see? Why did they take the photograph? And of course, many photos that I get are after the fact photos. People didn't see anything, but they look at the photo. Oh, this showed up in the photo. And for example, a lot of people would take photos into the sun or of a sunset, and then they'll see a blue object or such and such. Well, most of that is lens flare effect, particularly with iPhones. iPhones will show a green object. So that's what I do, and then I'll blow the photo up.
Wait, let me ask you a question, because you said something interesting. If a person is using a cell phone and takes a picture more or less oriented toward the sun, the object that they find in their picture is green. Is that a common thing, that it's kind of a signature of a lens flare?
It is for iPhones, yes. And I can't tell you why. I've looked up articles about it from Apple, and they'll show that, but I've seen that. And a lot of my reports come in via cell phone, because I have forums, mobile forums, and a lot of people will text me photos and videos on the cell phone. And so, a lot of those are cell phone photos. But, that's about the extent of analysis. I will sometimes do an invert the photo to see if there's lines in it, if someone's got object, flying something or got something projected. And I'll do contrast enhancements, I'll do brightness enhancements. And, in videos, I do the same thing. I'll do some enhancements of videos. And then if I suspect, and in many cases, that is the situation, Venus, Jupiter, people will take photos, they will blow them up, and you will see out of focus Venus or Jupiter, and it'll look really strange, and so I'll use astronomical software. I also look at weather clouds, and a lot of times reflections from ground lights will project off of low clouds. So those are all things that I do.
So when you get a photograph in, then you can look at it, and you look at what you call the metadata, and that provides you with a clue as whether or not the photograph has been manipulated in some fashion. And then you can look at these other aspects of it and determine whether or not there is an explanation for it that might be natural, such as Venus or reflections on the clouds. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also I'll look at heavensabove.com for satellite information. But doing those quick and dirty little analyses, I can make a lot of deductions about photos. Now, I'll cite you an example. I got a really good case of what I would term I called it a Star Trek type object from Libby, Montana, which is in the north part of Montana along US number 2. If you ever go to Glacier Park, you'll travel along number 2, you'll go through Libby. But when I first looked at it, it was taken by a person traveling in a car at night. So the first thing I said, well, it's got to be a reflection. Taken through a windshield, it's got to be a reflection sitting in the car. But the gentleman that sent me the photo, I think it was his mother-in-law, I might be wrong, it was a relative. He didn't take the photo. But he made a note, look, there's power lines. The power line, the object was on the other side of the power lines. That right there really eliminates or really makes it much less likely that that's a reflection of something inside the car. It makes it more likely that the object was on the other side of the power lines and is in fact a real object. So that's the kind of analysis that I do. And I rely on what the witness tells me too. What did they see?
Well, you don't
So-
post everything to your website then. When you get a picture and you say, here's a nice picture and here it is, you take an analysis and you said you eliminate some of the photographs by your analysis so they don't get posted to the website.
No, that's not correct. I post everything unless it's an outright hoax. I do that because I want people to know that I do look at everything, and a lot of cases I don't just post unidentified cases. I have a protocol that I categorize cases, what their explanation is. I can do that very easily in WordPress in a blog format. For example, all satellites, meteors, lens flares, I categorize them, and then unidentified. But I post all cases. Unless they're just outright hoaxes, I'll post them.
But when you post them, if you've got a suspicion of what the explanation is, if it's a mundane explanation, you do make a notation of that as well.
I do, absolutely. Sometimes I may not note it, but if they look in the blog format below, when they look at one of my reports, they'll see some underlines, some links. It'll say unidentified, lens flare, reflection. Or sometimes uncategorized. Anomaly in photo. Notice anomaly in photo. That's all below the report. And sometimes I'll make a few comments in my notations.
Well, I did notice on some of those that the one that I picked up was, of course, the satellite, the Starlink satellites. Do you have, I don't suppose it comes into you because you say a lot of pictures are taken by cell phone, but I've noticed in some other arenas that the witness attempted to take pictures by the cell phone, but it didn't work out. They could get just the sound, but not the object itself or things like that. Do you get many reports like that?
I get reports where, yes. I get quite a few where people say, yes, I took the photo, but didn't show up. Sometimes I will ask them to send me the photo because I mentioned previously that I can do some enhancements. And with enhancements, just because it didn't show up in the cell phone, if I brighten it up or increase the contrast, sometimes I can find the object that they photographed or videotaped also. So I ask them to send it to me anyhow. And sometimes, of course, I don't. And also I'll note, cell phones don't always, or cameras don't always do justice to what people see. They may see something that looks quite a bit different than what the cell phone or the camera will pick up. But I do look at it and try to make those notes. So it's always important to find out what the witness sees. And then a lot of times I get photos where the witness doesn't see anything. And sometimes those are interesting. I mean, sometimes those are definitely unidentified cases. I got one, I believe in Yosemite National Park, a really strange case. It's at the very bottom of my home page, and I cannot explain that. It almost looks like a cloaking type phenomena, very, very strange. But the person didn't see it, but found it after the fact when he later reviewed the photos. And sometimes that can be several months down the line where they're looking at vacation photos and find something unusual.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take another break here in just a moment. I want to point out that there are other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network at xzbn.net. I think I got that right this time. Take a look at the list of programs, and there's going to be something that's going to interest you there as well. Not only this program, but in other fine programs on it. As I say, look at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And the latest book is cleverly called Level Land, which is about the level land sightings. And I bring that up now because when we come back, I think I'm going to ask you about electromagnetic effects, because I know there's a portion of your blog that takes a longer look at that. So we will be back right after this. So please stick around. And welcome back to A Different Perspective. Again, I'm the host, Kevin Randle. I'm sitting here with William Puckett, who has been investigating UFOs probably almost as long as I have, I suppose, and hosts a website at www.ufosnw.com. Sorry, it took so long to get it out, but it's a ufosnorthwest.com. It's an interesting site to take a look at. When we went away, we were kind of talking about pictures, and I had mentioned something about a number of people who have said, well, I tried to take a picture, my cell phone didn't work right, which kind of leads us into electromagnetic effects. And that was why I mentioned the Levelland book, is because my book on Levelland deals with the electromagnetic effects, especially those reported around Levelland, Texas in November of 1957. But you have a segment on your website that deals with EM effects, electromagnetic effects. You've got some very interesting cases there as well. Can you share a couple of those?
Sure, I'll have to tune into my site here, but I do have as you pointed, a category for EM effects, and I use that category for any type of power outages or vehicle outages or anything to do with any type of interference. It could be radio, and I don't get a lot of those cases, but I do get a few. And I'd like to add also, and you may be aware of this, Kevin, we have a network of units called MADAR, MADAR, called Multiple Anomalous Data Automated Recording. And I have a unit in my house, and it is set up to detect electromagnetic changes in the electromagnetic fields. And we get alerts. And when we get alerts, we look for other correlation to UFO sightings. And the instrument actually detects any of the XYZ axis changes in electromagnetic fields. The unfortunate part of that is when you look at Maxwell's equations, electromagnetic fields are inversely proportional to the cube root of the distance. So they dampen pretty rapidly. But if you have UFO activity, electromagnetic anomalies are quite common. And so I did set up a category on my site for that very reason. And I'll just look at the top one on my categories. This is a recent case that I got, although I believe it's an old sighting in area. Well, actually, it's just a little about a year and a half ago. Mud Lake, Idaho, which is kind of in the central part of Idaho. Looks like it's, looking at the map on my site, it's northwest of Twin Falls, probably about, I would say 150 miles. And the actual location of the sighting was from Salmon, Idaho, which is, that's about, Salmon and Mud Lake are fairly close, but Salmon is quite a bit more well known. But I'll just kind of paraphrase what the witness said. I was traveling from Salmon, Idaho to Idaho Falls, Idaho on Highway 28 at 3 a.m., about 35 miles to the end of 28, Mud Lake, Idaho. The first thing I noticed was that my Kia Sportage started running like it was running out of gas. After looking at my fuel gauge and back at the road, there were white disc-shaped UFOs flying clockwise in squadrons of about 20 to 30. They were flying in big circular rotations so wide as each side of the mountain, still heading towards Mud Lake. I stopped my car, got out, and was concerned something might happen to me. So I got back in my car and took off. I looked to the left side, and over to the left side of the mountain, there was a huge, long white craft. I don't know if it was in flight since it was revealed over the mountain. But this formation of UFOs just flew in clockwise big circles. He puts this in caps, there must be a base somewhere over that mountain. So that's the case. And it was kind of an eye-opener to me, you know, that he sees UFOs, and well, he first notices his car sputtering, and then he looks to see UFOs. And a lot of times vehicles were shut down completely. Radios were turned off and back on. I've heard of vehicles turning spontaneously back on. I've also heard of magnetism, like objects can stick to the dashboard, nails or something. Those are the type of effects. There's also a case in Idaho, I don't remember when that was, but there were actual thunder showers in the area. And there was a big bunch of power outages, but we never attributed it to any meteorological phenomena. And there were quite a bit of power out, and there were a lot of strange lights in the area that night. I don't remember where that was in Idaho, but I know it was in eastern Idaho. So, you know, I also remember a case, this was in near Vaughan, Idaho, which, Kevin, you're familiar with Roswell. That's not too far from Roswell. And it was a truck driver.
You mean Vaughan, New Mexico?
I'm sorry. Yes, Vaughan, New Mexico.
Because I was about to say, you know, there's a Vaughan in New Mexico I've been through many, many times. So
yes, that's what I meant to say. I have too, en route to Roswell. But anyhow, he was driving a truck of cars. He'd been into Denver there were some cars auctioned off at car rental agencies were auctioning off cars, and he picked up a bunch of the used cars and was trucking to El Paso, Texas. So he stopped to take a look at his load, and suddenly he felt a lot of tingling on his arms, like his hair was standing on end, and then his truck turned off, and he looked up and he saw this huge black triangular object moving up from the south, and so the object just hovered, and everything was off, and he couldn't even get his flashlight to turn on. And so finally, he thought, well, he'd go back and try to get one of his cars off, because, you know, that's what he did in emergencies. And then suddenly his flashlight came on, and I believe his truck came on, and the vehicle just went in reverse and moved back to the south. So he hopped in his truck and got out of there. And when he got to El Paso and unloaded cars, he noticed that he had a wind-up clock in his sleeper, and that clock was 13 minutes ahead of all the electronic clocks. The electronic clock in his car and the electronic clocks in the vehicles to the back. So whatever this thing was, it shut everything down for 13 minutes. So that's one case. Whenever I think of EM effects, that sticks out. So those cases are ones that
in my book on Levelland, I cite 4 cases where cars change color with the close approach of the UFO, which is kind of bizarre. There's a very limited number of those cases, but it's attributed to a close approach of the UFO. And in one of the cases, the wife, when the husband got home, said, "Did you buy a new car?" Because the car, it had either been gray and it turned green, or it was green and it turned gray, but it changed color significantly enough that she noticed it and thought he'd bought a new car because of the close approach of the UFO. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly is, yeah, you're right. It's not just vehicle interference that we see. Most of the cases, the driver must take some kind of action to start the car again. It doesn't spontaneously start. In Levelland, almost all of the cases, it seemed that the cars needed to be started by the drivers, with one exception. The guy just insisted his car started spontaneously. And the Condon Committee used this to reject the idea of electromagnetic effects on cars, because they could think of no mechanism if you suppressed an electrical field by the use of a huge magnetic field, that when you remove that field, the car would restart spontaneously. The lights might come back on with the flow of electrons, but they could think of nothing, no mechanism which would cause the car to start spontaneously. And I went through an awful lot of the reports looking at that and discovered that for the most part, it seems that the people were talking about the cars not starting spontaneously. They say things like, well, then the car started normally, or the car operated normally, and that sort of thing. So in the book Level Land, I deal with, I think, several hundred cases, both in detail in the book and then in an appendix at the back where it talks about that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And there's also talking of power outages, knocking radio stations off the air and that sort of thing, well, with the electromagnetic effects. But you say you don't get many of those reports?
You're correct. I think I maybe only had one or two of spontaneous starting. For the most part, they have to start the vehicle. I don't specifically recall. I believe, I think I said that it spontaneously started as a diesel engine. And diesels, of course, operate different than, they pre-ignite, and then they start that way. But I think maybe he did restart the vehicle. I know the flashlights came on and the lights came on. But yeah, I think I've only had one or two where people say the vehicle spontaneously started again. And they were old cases, so you don't even know if people are, again, recalling, in detail, the correct detail of what they observed. But for the most part, that's the case. They have to restart the vehicle. But definitely a lot of them shutting down radios and vehicles, power outages, other effects indoor in the house of strange things happening. That's true.
Well, the thing that strikes me is we had a large number of those cases in 1957 in the United States. There was a large number of cases in France, in South America in 1954, but it doesn't seem that the stalling of the cars or the electromagnetic effects shutting off, it can be the power in the house, for example. There's one case where the object seemed to shut off the power in the house, and it shut off a car driving down the street and that sort of thing. But we don't seem to get a lot of those. It seems to be a rare subset of the overall UFO phenomenon. Do you think proximity weighs into that?
Well, I believe it does. I mean, as I mentioned, the electromagnetic field strength is inversely proportional to the cube root of the distance. So unless the object is very close, or the phenomenon is very close, or it's extremely strong, that would be the case. But I mean, you get electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear weapon, and that'll go out a long ways. I mean, that's, they talk about that jamming and everything in electronic warfare. Electromagnetic pulse will go out a long ways, and of course, but it's extremely strong. But yeah, I think it has to be fairly close to have a noticeable effect. But it might not take much. I don't know. I don't claim. I do have a good background in physics, but electromagnetism is not something I'm really well versed in. But I just know that, and there's been most of the cases that I have been involved with vehicles or radios, or et cetera. Not too many power outages, but the one in Idaho is the one that I remember the most. You mentioned Levelland. I can remember, I'm dating myself. I'll be 75 in a few weeks. I remember that case in November 1957. It was in the national news, and it created a big panic. It really did. It was right around the launch of Sputnik.
Yes, let me break in here because I'm going to have to take a break. We're running up against the time limit again, so we'll take a break here. I've dealt with some of the Level Land stuff at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. There's a search engine there. Just type in Level Land and it'll bring up the articles that I've done on that. Or take a look for the book Level Land, which just came out not that long ago, and it deals in depth with the Level Land sightings and everything that transpired around that as well. We will be back right after this with William Puckett talking about UFO, so please stick around. And welcome back. I am here with William Puckett. We're talking UFOs. We were talking electromagnetic effects, which I think is an interesting subset of the overall UFO picture, but it's a very rare occurrence when you're dealing with UFOs. But when we went away, you had mentioned you remembered the Levelland sightings from 1957, and they were, I think the Levelland sightings took place at the time the second Sputnik had been launched in 1957. But it hadn't gotten a lot of play. I know the Air Force and some of the people said, well, it was a result of Sputnik being launched and people responding to that in a hysterical way, I suppose. But I really don't see the correlation because that hadn't been big news when the report started in the Levelland area. And I explore that in the Levelland book, so I guess we don't really need to go into that in depth. There are many of the subsets in UFOs. We talked a little bit about photographs. We've talked a little bit about electromagnetic effects. Is there other aspects of it that you look for when you get reports, other things that are common to some of the UFO reports? For example, triangular UFOs, are those becoming more prevalent?
I wouldn't say they're becoming more prevalent, but they're definitely commonplace. I mean, I probably get at least 1 or 2 triangular reports a week. I get on an average of 1 case every 2 days, new cases. If I included old cases, I'd probably get at least a case a day. And I'd say of those subsets, I'd say 20% are triangles. I still get disc-shaped sightings, spherical objects, yellow orbs, and I have categories for all of those so that if I ever wanted to break down and do an analysis of percentages, I could do that. And that's a nice thing about using the MySQL database, which is the engine that runs WordPress. You can do the categorization. So yeah, there's, dark triangles, metallic objects and glowing objects. And of course, there's the usual suspects: meteors, satellites, comets, astronomical phenomena, hoaxes. And, I have categories for all those. And then I look, there are a lot of objects that are regular, strange shape, not symmetrical shape objects. Like I mentioned the Libby, Montana sighting. What did I call it? I called it a Star Trek object, because that's what it looked like. I mean, a really strange looking object. I've never seen anything like that before.
Well, I brought up triangles. Because it seemed to me in the last 10, 12 years, there have been many, many more triangle sightings than there were earlier on in the UFO phenomenon. And looking at the evolution of our military aircraft, for example, the F-111, the B-2 bomber, which are more or less triangular shaped, I wondered if the triangular shapes don't have a more mundane explanation, meaning an Earth-based explanation, that people aren't used to seeing aircraft that have those kinds of strange shapes.
Well, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, actually, a lot of triangle reports I get, they don't actually see the triangle. They'll see lights in a triangular formation. Sometimes you'll see a red light in the center. And sometimes they're just conventional aircraft, I think, that people are seeing, or military aircraft. Yes, that's definitely the case. Of course, boomerang, which is somewhat like a triangle. Elliptical. Sometimes I get elliptical shaped craft, oblong shaped craft. But yeah, I think a good percentage of triangles do have conventional explanation, but I think some of them are definitely unidentified. And some, of course, as you mentioned, we recently talked electromagnetic effects you see with triangular objects. And when they're silent and when they hover and then they streak away, when you look at some of those particular aspects of a sighting, then you got to put the unidentified tag on them, and maybe they are secret military craft. I don't know, but not all of them have conventional explanations. But I say a good percentage of them do, based on the reports that I get.
Well, I would also point out that if you put 3 dots on a piece of paper, you're almost going to get a triangular formation.
That's
unless
right.
it's a straight line.
That's right.
And we have to keep that in mind as well
That's right.
when we're looking at these sorts of things. I just wonder how sophisticated some people are when they're viewing the sky, especially at night. I think they're fooled an awful lot by stars. I think you mentioned autokinesis, which is actually a movement in the eye as opposed to the object moving. It seems like it's dancing around and it's really a motion of the eye. But I wonder how many of the sightings can be explained by those sorts of mundane things, especially older sightings when we weren't nearly as sophisticated as we are today.
Autokinesis accounts for a lot of things. This is particularly true when people are looking at Venus and Jupiter. They'll get it, they'll start videotaping it and they'll jiggle the camera around and this thing is bouncing around. Then they'll look at the object or Venus or Jupiter and say, oh, it's moving around. And they're always saying this, it'll stay in one area of the sky, which is a tip off right away. Another tip off is I see this every night, and consecutive nights, and sometimes too, what'll happen, it's not always autokinesis. You can have a high cloudiness, high thin cirrus clouds, and they're opaque enough to dim out, maybe Venus or Jupiter or a star, and then they'll pass by, and then the people will see the object. That also can create some, very definite anomalies or optical illusions when you get high thin clouds. That's why I always like to look at the weather. Unfortunately, with the weather of this day and age, and I can say this as a professional meteorologist, when I was working for the National Weather Service, which was in the late 70s and early 80s, we took our own weather observations. We used a salometer to measure cloud depth. We estimated clouds. We took visibility. Nowadays, it's all automated. And automated observations are much less detailed. And it'll say haze when in fact it's snowing. And the clouds, high clouds above probably 10,000 feet aren't measured by the salometers, the automated stations, and they use satellites to measure higher clouds. So weather observations are much less detailed. Sometimes you got to look at satellite photos too, which is sometimes what I do when I try to determine. And then, of course, I asked the witness, what was the weather? I mean, who's a better person to gauge the weather than the person that's seeing the UFO?
Was there a sighting that really struck your fancy? I mean, an exciting sighting that you have no explanation for that tips you maybe toward the extraterrestrial, or an off-world type explanation?
Well, I got a lot of them, but I'd like to discuss a recent case that I got that as of yet, no one has given me an explanation. And I'm going to go to my website. This happened in, I think, South Carolina. It was I go to my home page here, page down here a bit. This happened in Bluffton, South Carolina, January 13th, 2022. And this person took a video, which I haven't unpacked yet, but he took a photo and the object was floating. And it's really a strange looking object. It looks like a cylinder, and then there's kind of a ball on the one side of it. And it's floating. And I said, well, could it be some sort of a balloon? But I don't know. I mean, it was heading slowly east-northeast. And I just have my doubts about this, what it was. And another case that I think is definitely an extraterrestrial spacecraft. This was in Dana Point, California. And I believe it was March 31st, 2007. Obviously, it strikes a chord if I can remember that detail. A guy was out walking one morning. I think it was 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And he saw this disc-shaped object flying south, and he attributed to jet speed. Suddenly it just stopped in midair, and he took a photo of it, and then it just zipped away. And the photo, I've looked at this photo a number of times. It's clearly a disc-shaped craft. The metadata doesn't support any photoshopping. I had some people in that area do some analysis for me, to see if it could be hoax. That particular observation, that particular sighting, I really attribute as quite likely a higher intelligence object. I really do. That's one that really sticks in my mind.
And what was the date of that?
I think it was March 31st, 2007. And it would be on my old website. But Dana Point, California. Dana Point is right south of Los Angeles International Airport. And as you probably know, Kevin, that's the area where a lot of UFOs are seen coming in and out of the water, like Catalina Island off the coast of California. That's an area where, now I might add that this particular witness didn't see this UFO going in and out of the water. Another case, and this is not a photo
let me
case.
interrupt you because we're running out of time. I'm sorry, we don't have time to get into that. I'd love to hear about that. I could listen to these stories all day. Give us your website once again.
It's www.ufosnw.com. And all the cases that I talked about on your show today, people can find those cases, some on my homepage, others they'll have to click on some links, dates and times and locations to find these other cases. But for the most part, they're all on my site that I discussed today.
Well, thank you for taking time with us today. I appreciate the effort and certainly the conversation. I think it's always fascinating to listen to what other UFO researchers have to say about their experiences in UFO research. That was William Puckett. He's got a nice website. It's got a lot of photographs up on it. And we learned a little bit about his analysis and what the criterion are for posting them on his website. So I think it's something we need to take a look at. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm going to talk just a moment about that. I was invited to do a book called Understanding UFO. It'll be out in time for the 75th anniversary of the Roswell case. And it's a little bit different than the other books because I go in depth into the backgrounds of some of the witnesses that were involved, the military witnesses, for example, in the Brazel family. So you get a better idea of who they were and how this affected them throughout their lives, whether or not it was important to them or not, that kind of thing. But that's called Understanding Roswell. And the book that just came out not that long ago is called Level Land, and it deals with the electromagnetic effects around the Level Land, Texas area, but also as it sort of expanded out from Level Land throughout the United States in 1957. And there's a listing of cases, an appendix that's filled with cases starting in 1909, an electromagnetic case from 1909 and the sighting of the strange object up through not that long ago, of course, including animal reactions, which are part of the whole electromagnetic spectrum, power outages, car stallings, and other compasses being affected. And I mentioned that specifically because a guy named Eric Herr had done his research was just looking for compasses being affected by a UFO, and he came up with 140 or 150 cases like that, and a lot of them are listed in the book as well. Next week, I'm going to talk to Jim Horan, who is the editor of the Journal for Scientific Exploration, and what that's all about and what the journal encompasses, and his research into UFOs. He did, I think, one of the very first experiments that related to the Ramey memo, which I assisted him with, by the way, but it was providing students with an opportunity of 3 different types of scenarios and how they interpreted what was written in the memo, and whether or not any conclusions can be drawn from that. So we'll be talking about that and his UFO experiences next week. As I say, I will be back in about 167 hours with another edition of A Different Perspective. Thanks for tuning in.